Not hearing the sound, are you?
I'm not.
Remember, if you're muted. Still no sound, Will.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joel Whitney from the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents. I'm pre-recording this welcome for technical reasons, but I wanted to say that we at BPL are so pleased to welcome Pankaj Mishra to the International Writers Series as he joins Jennifer Egan tonight to discuss his new novel, Run and Hide. I'll turn it over to a live Anderson Tepper, our series curator, in a moment to welcome Pankaj and Jennifer to the BPL virtual stage. They've both been on the real stage before, by the way, and we're so pleased to have them and all of you here for this conversation across the ocean and the pandemic, as it were. Before I turn it over, I invite you to stay in touch with BPL Presents at our website, bklynlibrary.org/BPL Presents. There you'll find our roster of author talks, conversations, debates, concerts, historical panels, films, and art exhibits. You can also follow us on social media at the same handle, BPL Presents. My colleague will drop these links in the chat, so you can click and follow us now if you're not already. And now, without any further ado, for our conversation and our series host, Anderson Tepper, I'll just give you a sample of his bio. He's the co-chair of the International Committee of the Brooklyn Book Festival and has written for the New York Times Book Review, Vanity Fair, World Literature Today, and Words Without Borders, among many other publications. Please welcome Anderson Tepper.
Great. Thank you, Joel, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's been a real pleasure during these last two strange, difficult, shut-in years to be able to host this virtual international authors series with intimate conversations with some of my favorite writers of all time, and Scott Momaday, Damon Galgut, Ben Okri, Nadifa Muhammad, to name just a few. And the series will continue on Saturday, April 16th with three debut novelists, Ayana Lloyd Banwo, Okwiri Aduro, and Elagusa Osunde. And now what a joy to welcome Pankaj Mishra, who's joining us from Spain, whose debut novel, The Romantics, for me was one of the most brilliant and moving novels of the many exciting works of a new generation of Indian writers in the late 90s, early 2000s. Among others, Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, Vikram Chandra's Love and Longing in Bombay, Raj Kumar Jha's Blue Bedspread, Amit Chaudhry's Freedom Song, A New World, and other books. Some of these writers, by the way, as well as Salman Rushdie, Naipaul, Vikram Seth, actually appear in Run and Hide, his new novel, which spans the boom in Indian writing and publishing and literary festivals, the dot-com wave, webzines, and much more. In the 2 decades since The Romantics, Mishra's work has gone on to include such formative nonfiction books as An End to Suffering, Temptations of the West, From the Ruins of Empire, Age of Anger, Bland Fanatics, and more. He is one of the most incisive and relevant critics of our changing world, whose essays and reviews have appeared in The Guardian, London Review of Books, New York Review of Books, The New Yorker, N+1, and other places. Tonight it is a special thrill to have Jennifer Egan in conversation with Pankaj about his new novel, Run and Hide, which has just come out. Egan is the author of 6 books of fiction, including Manhattan Beach, The Invisible Circus, and the Pulitzer Prize winning A Visit from the Goon Squad. Her new novel, The Candy House, a companion to Goon Squad, is due out next month from Scribner. So thank you both. Welcome, and over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. It is such a joy to have a chance to talk about this incredible book Pankaj has written. The only thing better would be doing it in person, but we are just delighted to have you with us. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask Pankaj to kind of set up the beginning of the book, which covers for a short and actually, a book that you tend to tear through. Pankaj covers a lot of geography and also a pretty big swath of time. So he will set up where he starts, then he will do a short reading, and then we will get into a conversation. Feel free to put your own questions in the chat, and I will do my best to get to some of them toward the end of our meeting tonight. So Pankaj, I'm going to turn it over to you to just give us our entry point and do a reading with us.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, Joel and Andy, for having me on this. Oh, so I'm still new to this, as you can tell. So the book really starts with three friends meeting one night, their very first night at this Institute of Technology, that they've worked very hard to get into. And I should explain that there are several such Institute of Technologies in India. And for a long time, I think close to 4 or 5 decades, they have served for millions and millions of people, in their imagination at least, as the portals to the richness of the world. So if you're very poor and if you're very promising as a student, if you can get into any of these institutes, you're guaranteed a life of stability and prosperity of the kind that your parents or grandparents have been dreaming for a very long time. And these institutes are one of a kind. They're sort of world class, and in fact, many of the people who work at in Silicon Valley tech companies, or even hedge funds or banks, you would find people from IITs overrepresented in some of the most successful, some of the most well-known prominent corporations in the United States and Europe. And it is because these institutes are extremely good. They train people to go abroad and to do further studies, and for that reason they've sort of become hugely attractive to several generations of young students. So my book starts with these three students sometime in the late 1980s coming together. They're still teenagers, very fragile. They've basically spent most of their childhood preparing to get into this to this Institute of Technology. And on the very first night, they are forced to undergo a very humiliating ritual of initiation, which is again a very commonplace, at least back in the 1980s. It was a very commonplace practice, an extremely cruel and humiliating ordeal, and actually many people sometimes simply don't survive it. It's just too much for them, but it's something that happens to all of them, and everyone sort of really puts up with it because there's no other alternative. You just have to go there to this place and spend 3 or 4 years there, and then really move forward to embrace this future that you've been promised by the place. So I'm going to read a little bit from one of the early chapters about the narrator returning to his very modest home from the coaching classes that he attends to get into this Institute of Technology. For 2 years before I got into IIT and left my childhood home for good, I attended coaching classes in Delhi. Like Asim and Virendra, I always returned home with a growing dread of what I would find there. How agonizingly vivid are those scenes from the 1980s in which I find some clues to our later conduct. The train from Old Delhi station, obstinately fuming and grinding across the plains of Punjab and Haryana, reaches Devli at about 5 in the morning. Narrow, roofless platforms hurtle past the windows of my second-class unreserved carriage all night, the wind through the bars blowing coal dust in my ear. When the train stops, I see a dimly lit station platform where coolies prowl, always in twos, ready to rush the rare alighting passenger, ready to roll their scarves onto a circular pad on their head and receive a metal trunk on this impromptu cushion before mincingly walking away into the night. From somewhere comes the clatter of an iron cart and the clank clank and dong dong of a hammer testing wheels. Shadowy people pass the window, never to be seen again. One of them turns halfway around, but only to squirt a tremendous spit of pan juice onto the floor. Then, with several hisses, the coach lurches off, passing the signalman holding up a lantern, his face fiendish in the trembling green glow. It rocks gently as it switches tracks, the few lights thin, and the extensive night outside my window resumes its course, but not for long. I sit on a straight-backed wooden bench, wedged in between several people and facing a similarly tense row on the opposite side, with sinking heads jerking up and then again starting to slowly sink. In the bunk above me, the faint yellowish light of the lamps exposes a jumble of half-slumbering bodies with mouths agape like fish. Sometimes I doze off, but the train whistles with piercing melancholy, stutters over a level crossing, roars into a loud tunnel, the metal window shutter starts clattering in its frame, or the man next to me, sitting hunched over, his big strong nose snoring softly and giving off a thick smell of sweat, suddenly slumps onto my lap. My whole body goes tense. I want so badly to stretch my legs and put my feet up on something. And in that state of immobility, I become convinced that happiness will always be beyond my reach. Dabley has no railway yard worth speaking of, only a few condemned carriages and wagons and locomotives of crumpled iron on a couple of sidings. There is one platform with a small roof under which stands a stone building painted with stripes of white and brown. It accommodates the station master's office and a stall from which my father sells tea, samosas, sliced rice bread, biscuits, hard-boiled eggs, pan, and cigarettes. At daybreak, men and women are sleeping everywhere on the pan-stained floor, draped head to toe in white, the white always shocking, the color of death and mourning, under urgently spinning low fans. Imagine me alighting into this haven for the destitute, walking through the anonymous white bundles, past the dogs that are beginning to wake and mourn, through a muddy forecourt of two-wheeled tongas, cycle rickshaws, and bullock carts, and an open refuse heap which stray cows timidly pillage, shifting a hoof now and then, their skin twitching. In a narrow dirt lane stands the barracks for railway workers, their walls plastered with drying cow dung cakes, and broken furniture spilled across the small yards before every room. Underneath, clotheslines laden with washing, crucifixes of shirts with waterlogged sleeves, pythons of crooked, wrung-out saris, scrawny chickens scratch the earth, and only the occasional row of tulsi and old dalda tins speak of a feeling for order and the vanity of ownership. At this time in the morning, cooking fires from angitis rise in fine columns to the blue sky. In our own little yard, a cow stands nibbling under a rough lean-to roofed with thatch, over fresh ordure humming with garnet green flies. She's tightly leashed to an iron stake so that she can't reach either our small cabbage and tomato patch or the black pot over the brazier in which my mother cooks every morning and afternoon, squatting on the tiny veranda made by the overhang of the roof, the anchal of a sari spilling over into the ground. Our home is a small coterie with beige-colored walls and two high and narrow windows that lashly squint out at the yard. There is no furniture apart from an iron chest in one corner and a pile of mattresses of coarse coconut fiber on the red concrete floor. One wall has inset shelves painted green and enameled tumblers, steel plates, and 4 china cups. The white crockery is monogrammed with a steam engine that proclaims India's national motto, Satyamev Jayate, truth alone triumphs, the only item of luxury in the room. It is carefully preserved, for it was stolen early in my father's career from Indian Railways. Next to the shelves, from a nail, a woven bag hangs against the wall. A copper sink stands in one corner above a short-handled broom. Dust adheres to all the moldings of the doors. It has turned stringy the cobwebs dangling from the corners of the naked galvanized roof, and stained gray the blades of the ceiling fan. The walls grow a greenish shade of mold after every monsoon season, and the room is as chilly and damp in the winter as it is warm and humid in the summer. In that coterie, where I seem to have lived for an eternity, it is impossible to imagine a future for myself that might be different.
Thank you so much. One of the things I love about this novel is that you do so many things at one time. And I think that this passage speaks to two of those things. One is the book is rooted in incredibly powerful sensory detail. We are in the body, smelling, hearing, observing, and yet it also feels so clear right from the beginning that we are dealing with a very engaged book thematically. And what we see here is Arun, our narrator's childhood, which is full of deprivation, very hard scrabble. And in fact, as the passage reveals shortly after where you stopped, there's actual abuse in his childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And there's this promise or hope of deliverance out of that through the education that Arun has attained, and indeed for his two friends, Asim and Virendra. And the idea is that it's the new India, this concept of sort of what India is about to become in a moment of incipient globalization that I think we all felt. I certainly remember feeling it here in America, but not quite as specifically as what you describe in India. So I wonder if you could talk about what that idea of the new India was and why it landed so hard in among these young men that you're describing.
Well, I think, for many people who roughly around the late 1980s and early 90s began to emerge from these institutions, they were suddenly aware that the world was changing, and the world was changing really dramatically. The Cold War had ended, and economic globalization was something, even though it wasn't really called that at the time, but there was something in the air. India was opening up its economy to foreign investment. A lot of foreign goods that were previously not available were suddenly, available, and it was a very heady period. And there was this idea that, somehow these very cruel social hierarchies that so many Indians had grown up in, hierarchies both of class and caste. I should also emphasize that most of the characters, the two male characters in the book, belong to a low caste. So they're not only carrying the humiliations of class in their souls, but also the humiliations inflicted on their parents and on their ancestors for centuries and centuries, the humiliations of caste. And back in the late 80s and early 90s, there was this idea that we could break out of these horrible social systems and embrace this new meritocratic society that was emerging in America and Europe, where talent counted, where education counted, and it did not matter where you were born, what kind of advantages you inherited. So the new India grew out of what was essentially a modest desire to improve your circumstances and to just have a better life, a much better life than the ones that your parents had known. It was around the late 90s or so when the idea started to go around that India was not only going to become a much more prosperous country, it was going to be a superpower, and that was the new India fantasy. That a vast majority of the Indian population would grow rich and would enjoy the kind of living standards that, you know, a tiny minority in America and Europe had known. So that was really, in many ways, in retrospect, of course, it was sort of inordinate fantasy, because I think it would have taken a long time for India, even if it had done everything right at that point, educated all its people, you know, invested in public health. It would have still taken them a long time to become an international superpower. But there's this sort of, this idea went around very rapidly that your immediate circumstances will all be improved very dramatically, and that India was rising. And, you know, you'll probably remember that this was also something that was being constantly amplified in the Western press. So people going out to India were talking about this constantly. There were cover stories in American periodicals and Time and Newsweek and Foreign Affairs. So, you know, this idea really solidified and began to influence the ways in which people thought about their place in the world, the way they thought about their prospects, and the way they thought about their future. And this generation that I focus on in this book was actually best placed to benefit from this period of globalization. They were all techies, and, you know, the dot-com boom was just happening when they arrived in the US. So they were just there at the right time to embrace all those new opportunities and become very rich, very, very dramatically, very rapidly. And then, of course, you know, the people who followed them were inspired by the successes. So this went on for like 10, 15 years before we started to realize this was not really happening for, you know, more than a small number of people.
So, and there's something very male and sort of fraternity-like about the initial bonding of these guys. Part of it is the hazing, which I think we in America associate a lot with male for college fraternities. But I feel in your book, it's you're also getting at something about this promise, which seems to be offered to men far more than women. And you describe Arun's hometown and his family, who I think you describe as being one step away from agrarian. They've sort of just moved beyond that. And his father works for the railway, as you said. But I was very touched throughout the book by the story of Arun's sister, Meena. And I'm just going to read an introductory description of her at age 10. You write in Arun's voice, "She is beginning to resemble my mother. She has the same white and pinched fingers that come from endless washing and cleaning. Afraid of everything, she is seized with abrupt and irresistible urges to hide and cry." So again, we have this sense of real torment in these living conditions, and certainly for Meena, who seems to have no prospect of any kind of future. She feels old at age 10. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the gendered aspects of this promise of a better life and how it played out over time for women.
Well, it was very gendered. Thank you for this question. Because this was something, you know, I've been thinking about for a long time. In fact, I wrote my first book about the explosion of ambition and energy in these small towns back in the mid-90s. And it was clear to me back then that so much of this ambition that was being unleashed was fundamentally masculinist in its sort of at its core. And it was about domination. It was about a fantasy of power that definitely involved domination. And when it did not involve domination, it definitely was indifferent to the rights of women or to the idea that women should be treated equally. So, you know, for instance, my narrator, he's educated by his father, and his father saves money by denying his daughter any kind of education. And this is, again, you know, a very commonplace occurrence. You know, the statistics, the data for all this is deeply depressing from India. The amount of you know, number of girls who are killed or who die in India, you know, before they reach the age of 1 or 2. So there's always this expectation that it's the male member who's going to realize all these dreams of a better life that parents have harbored for a long time. And with that comes a whole set of attitudes towards women, ranging from contempt to kind of benign neglect. And although women have embraced many of these opportunities in the last 20 to 3 decades, and have gone on to occupy important positions in public life, and there is a lot of resentment of that amongst many young men today. So that is reflected in the kind of violence that is unleashed against women in India, especially in the sort of urban areas or bigger cities where women are very visibly in positions of power and influence. So I felt like I needed to describe some of these lives, such as Arun's sister and his mother, who have not been educated, who've been kind of condemned really to a life of servitude. And this is the fate of, literally hundreds of millions of people. And as I, right now, it's very difficult to see how that could change. How we could move towards a society where the rights of women, or the rights, their right to create a future for themselves through education, those rights can be guaranteed. So it's certainly, to answer your question, this discourse of ambition, this discourse of the new India, of power, has been very gendered. And not surprisingly, the Prime Minister today, who embodies a certain kind of Indian Hindu masculinity, is someone who really is liked and loved for this kind of Putinesque aura that he has, which is really one of a brute, one of a masculinist brute.
So Arun and Asim and Virendra begin their educations with tremendous family expectations. I'm not going to say support, because I think that's going too far. But they have, as you say, they have the golden ticket. They're in this university that will give them access to a different kind of life. Things do not go as planned for any of them. I don't want to give too much away, but I think that the book very cleverly and deeply ponders why that is. And it seems that there are sort of 2 aspects to it. And I want to just talk about the first one. And that leads me to just briefly touch on the conceit of the book, which is that Arun, our narrator, is actually addressing someone else in this narrative. He is addressing a woman named Aliyah, whom he's had a relationship with, but what really he's doing is setting the record straight, having read a book she has written about the events of the novel, which he disagrees with and feels doesn't do a good job. Is that a fair description of
Absolutely
what's going
it
on?
is.
So in addressing Aliyah about the shortcomings of her book, Arun says at one point, let's see, exploring the conditions that molded them, meaning the 3 people here that we're talking about, could have filled out the story you wanted to tell in your book. You were not sure if our pre-IIT experiences had any explanatory value. It's so American, you once said, this obsession with personal history, this idea that it can really explain who you are and what you have done, as though we are always denied the choice to break free of it. Which I thought was very provocative. And you're quite, of course, very right about American obsession with narratives and personal stories. And yet it felt to me like, in fact, the personal histories of these 3, and particularly Arun, the narrator, actually are partly the reason that things don't go according to plan. So I wondered if you could talk about that.
Yes, I think the device really also was to cut through 2 or 3 decades of personal and collective history as quickly as possible, because if it had been conventional novel with a third person narrator. It would have taken me a long time to kind of, go through those very event-packed years. So I had to sort of come up with this device of addressing it to the narrator's girlfriend, who is writing a book of journalism about his friends. And he can very clearly see that journalism of this kind, which relies on, on facts or information out there in the public domain, is sort of basically constructing a very straightforward newspaper historical narrative about how these people went from India and then lost their way in the United States on Wall Street and got embroiled in various sort of corruption scandals. Whereas he can see that so much of their trajectory was shaped by what happened to them when they were in India, the injuries of class and caste that were inflicted on them very early on, not only on them, but on their parents, and the way these injuries were passed on to them. So they are in many ways damaged people. And I think that is something that Alia, who's writing this book of journalism, is unable to see. And this is also, this defect of vision is also something that I encounter often amongst people who write about these kinds of things, because they themselves belong to a metropolitan elite, which is not fully aware of what really goes on in some of these smaller towns. Because if you're a member of the metropolitan elite, you're a classless person, and you're also a casteless person. It doesn't matter where you come from. The fact that you've been to the same places in Oxbridge, you've been to the same Ivy League institutions, and that's really what holds you all together. And you're generally ignorant of, if not actively indifferent to, what goes on elsewhere in a place like India. So I wanted to describe that gap of perception that exists between people who actually write about these things and the reality of these lives, which are not only of, the reality is not only of destitution, but of a continuous feeling of shame and humiliation. And also the sense that, because you come from such a shameful past, you have to overthrow it in some way. You have to disown it in some way or other. So everything that makes us who we are, which is the past, which is our childhoods in many ways, you have to disown it. You have to trample it, as the character says, quoting V.S. Naipaul, that you have to trample the past. It's like trampling your garden into the dust. It's painful in the beginning, but then you just get used to it. And then at some point, the garden turns into mud or dust. So that, with that kind of attitude, really, in many ways, you're cutting yourself off. You're cutting yourself off from any kind of sustaining connection with the past, with your parents, with your sibling. And this is again, something that I've noticed not only in India, but also in China, where, again, some very dramatic transformation has taken place, and people have been propelled from living in the 19th century to living in the 20th century. And they've also been asked in many ways to disown, to spurn this past that they come from. And I think that makes for a very unstable, a very, incoherent personality, because I do think that the past is in many ways is a source of your identity. And this whole idea of remaking yourself all the time, of inventing yourself all the time, is something that really can only give you very partial fulfillments. And that someone who's fully aware of what has made them, fully aware of the people in the past who have been very crucial, no matter how cruel they might have been at some point or other, but the connection with your family, the connection with the people you grew up with, the friends there. If you're asked to really reject all of that, then you're really cutting yourself loose and becoming, on your way to becoming a very lost person. And this is something that happens to these characters.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up the example of China, because I think about the way that people's physical landscapes have been completely erased, and these sort of monotonous skyscrapers put up instead. And there's been really interesting writing about just the literal displacement of people and how hard it has been to basically experience the loss of these communities, this sort of small family homes for modern apartments. And I'm again sort of brought back to the vividness of place in your book. It plays a huge part. And we heard that in what you read, the details, the physical details, often very painful in Arun's childhood. There are details of discomfort and want, and sometimes antagonism among family members. And yet they're so powerful that they exert a hold on the reader and clearly also on Arun. And I just wondered if you could talk about place itself as a part of this book, because it feels crucial.
Well, thank you, Jenny. I mean, I think it was especially important, precisely because of the reason you just underlined, which is that the landmarks that you grow up with, they have disappeared really, so dramatically, so quickly in the last 20, 30 years. And that accentuates, this aggravates this feeling of being lost, because there is really nothing you can connect yourself to anymore, not even in the places that you grew up in. And as you say, in China, in India, this process has been particularly rapid. When you think about the 19th century novels, when you think about that journey from the provinces to the big city, to Paris or to London, there's always a place to go back to. All these heroes of Balzac or Stendhal or Flaubert, at some point they go back to the village. No, nothing has happened to the village that they left. It's still the same. The tragedy for many of the characters that I'm writing about, or that you can find very easily in India and China today, there is nothing to go back to. Once you leave your village, it's completely transformed, and all the landmarks that had orientated you to your world have disappeared. So in many ways, I've also experienced this sort of really strange disappearance of all the landmarks that I grew up with. So writing this book, I mean, personally for me, was also a way of reclaiming them. And perhaps the intensity that you find in my descriptions of place comes from this desire, somewhere deep within myself, to kind of recreate in prose some of the sensations, some of the impressions of these places, and to kind of live through them again, simply because they don't really exist anymore. So I can only do it really on the page.
There's something, to my mind, a little bit playful about the idea that this book is addressed to, or sort of is responding to, a not fully satisfying journalistic account of the same events, because you, of course, are a journalist and have written many books, and articles, that are dealing with some of the very issues that we're talking about now, but from a more fact-based approach. And I think I think it's fair to say that you've helped many, well, certainly myself and others, to understand how globalization and this kind of failed promise of a new India have affected people in India. So I'm curious about, now you wrote a novel many years ago, which I loved, but it's been a long time. And when you and I met, which was actually in 2003, we were both doing a fellowship at the public library. You were working on a novel then. So talk about the genesis of this book as a work of fiction, and especially why fiction? What can you do with fiction that you cannot do as a journalist?
Oh, I think practically everything that's important that you can do in fiction, but you really can't do in nonfiction. And in many ways, I mean, I think this book really came out of a long-standing frustration with what I was doing and what I had been doing over the last 20 years. Because I started off as a novelist, wanting to be a novelist and really, sort of infatuated with that idea. And then, I think back in the early 2000s, there was a great demand for, nonfiction. You'll remember, especially after 9/11, a great demand for people to explain what was going on in many Asian societies in particular. And then there was this, thing of India rising, China rising, what is going on in these places. And I was the beneficiary of that curiosity in the West, constantly being asked to do stuff. It was a way to make a living, way to travel to all kinds of places I would not have otherwise gone to. So it's very attractive and was, the years passed. But then I was, always nagged by a feeling that I was missing so many things. I could see them, I could sense them, but there was no way I could work them into my magazine article, or even when I was writing books, that I was dealing with ideas, I was dealing with abstractions, but I wasn't really describing human beings in any kind of, important detail. So I knew I had to go back to fiction at some point to do that, because it's only fiction really that captures the whole human being. It's only fiction, the realm of imagination really, where you are free to actually explore people's inner lives, their motivations, and to bring into play, I think, also your own selves. That's something I could never do in nonfiction. I mean, I really do think that we consist of many different selves, both real, hypothetical, and that fiction brings into play all these different parts of your personality. And so I can see now, I have to finish the book. I can see, how certain characters carry traces of my own self. And again, it was immensely rewarding and enriching, to write fiction. I mean, I'm so envious of you having done that consistently over such a long period, because, I really enjoyed writing this book more than I've enjoyed writing anything in the last 20 years. So in that sense, it was a kind of revelation, what fiction can do. It made me a kind of, fanatical convert to the religion of fiction in many ways. And because there was a time when I thought, okay, maybe it's nonfiction's turn to describe the world, to describe how it came to be, and what is happening or what can happen. But I think actually fiction, in the way it's able to capture, describe human consciousness and the pressures on that consciousness also of politics, of history, the way ideas and ideologies work on human beings. There is no nonfiction form that can do it, can do that job of description as vividly as fiction. So I've been thinking for a long time of writing this novel for at least now 6 or 7 years. And I think it was really only 3-4 years ago that I started to kind of think very seriously about it, and then started to experiment with forms, what could work, and I was, I think, fortunate to find something that I felt like could take me through 3 decades without my writing a huge 600-700 page novel that I'd probably never finish writing.
How was the writing process different for you? You write a lot of journalism, and I'm guessing that you have a methodology. Did you approach this in the same way, or was it different? And even just in terms of the rituals of writing, how do you do it in the 2 ways?
It was very strange. I mean, it was very strange at first to think of a whole novel in this way. And I struggled a lot, I have to say, in the beginning. And then I actually, found myself writing scenes. I had certain scenes in mind, or descriptive passages. So those were easy to do because they were already there in my head. And then I would describe images or particular images, and I would put together a whole lot of images and scenes. And then I would find ways in which I could insert characters in those images and those scenes. So it was not, I mean, as you can see, it's not really a plot-driven novel. It's very much a record of a consciousness, or it's the way a certain character sees the world. And so it's I found that that was the method that worked for me best, rather than think of, a book that I'm going to write from, the beginning and with a middle and an end. I would sort of just compile a whole series of scenes and then shuffle them around. I was doing that shuffling until quite late into the publication of the book. And somehow that seemed to me to work, because I think if I had written it in the sort of conventional way, in the way I write my nonfiction or my journalism, it would have probably lacked some of the intensity that came from thinking or conceiving of it in terms of, concrete images.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to start looking at the chat, and we have some very interesting questions already. But I wonder if you could just, I guess I'm asking you this as a fiction writer and a journalist and a pundit, frankly, to just revisit the question of sort of how the pandemic has impacted the world that you describe in India. I mean, in a way, you leave us a little bit before the present. And I guess I'm wondering if you could just bring us up to the present now in the context of the ideas and the trends that you're talking about.
Well, the pandemic has been devastating for India. No question about it. It's sort of set back India by at least a decade. So all the people who emerged from, grinding poverty in the last 2 decades or so, many of them have been pushed back into it because of the pandemic, because of unemployment. And also, some of these families lived really very precariously anyway. There were only one illness in the family away from penury. And, the pandemic made sure that many of them went back into debt. They had very few savings, and we're talking here of hundreds of millions of people who found themselves in this position. And it's really very difficult to see where growth is going to come from with the world economy to now in a tailspin. So the dream of the new India has failed. And I mean, it was never really going to succeed. Even before the pandemic, it was kind of broken, really. But the pandemic has really destroyed that particular dream. And I think, I mean, now all we can hope for is a certain degree of political stability. Because, like, as in many other countries, I think the political situation there grows grimmer and grimmer. And the novel ends at the point where things are beginning to fall apart very, very dramatically. It doesn't go into those kinds of details because I didn't really want to, make the background bigger than it is in the book. But I think there is a very strong sense that this is a place that is going to undergo a lot of political earthquakes, a lot of socio-economic upheavals in the years to come.
So I'm going to jump into the chat and kind of combine a couple of questions into one question, which really has to do with cast. And I guess there are two parts of it. One is, could you tell us about your personal and direct experiences with the types of people that you describe in this book? And then as a corollary of that, why the choice not to write about upper class males, for example, in India?
Well, there are upper class males in the book, but I wanted to focus on people from lower caste families who, some of whom have done, well in the last 2-3 decades or so. And I think, also I felt, again, in the nonfiction that I'd done, I'd written a lot about, upper caste men, the sort of essentially the Brahmin caste of the ruling, which is the ruling class in India. So I wanted to give myself also a very different challenge, so as to not rewrite my journalism in fiction. In fact, many of my decisions in this novel have to do with the fact, very simple, fear that I should not be converting my journalism into a fictional narrative, that I need to do something different. Also, there's a whole store of my experience, and that's part of the question too, that I hadn't used before, of growing up in small railway towns and observing these cruelties of caste and class. I was relatively privileged belonging to an upper caste, and immune to all these humiliations that other people suffer. I remember very vividly once surprising a classmate who went to the same school. He was a very promising student. I remember surprising him returning from open air defecation in the morning. And the shame that he felt then and felt afterwards was, at that moment, it was written on his face. And afterwards, too, it was something very deeply awkward between us for, 2-3 years that I then spent in that school. And he went on to become a chartered accountant, which was, which was really an incredible leap for someone like him from that kind of background to make. And there were many people like that who had done that, but they were always, in a way, deeply, deeply marked by this early experience of shame and humiliation. And that was something I really wanted to explore, just how cruel this particular system is, and how how sort of deeply, irreparably it wounds so many people.
Another question is, do you think caste will always be a perennially enduring feature about India?
It's been proven to be extremely difficult to eradicate. It continuously reproduces itself in some way or other, because it is a system, as a great sort of leader and thinker Ambedkar put it, of kind of graded inequality, and there is always a temptation because there are there isn't a sort of simple structure where one caste is oppressing another caste. There is a whole hierarchy in which any one caste given the opportunity will oppress the caste below it. So it manages to perpetuate itself, through these very sinister mechanisms. And no matter how much affirmative action you have, no matter how much sort of politics opens up to people from low caste background, the atrocities against low caste Hindus continue. They even have intensified in recent years. And certainly the idea that capitalism, or the arrival of global capitalism in India, with its promise of meritocracy, with its promise of rewarding talent and merit, is going to destroy these antiquated caste structures, that promise has not been realized. So I have no clear answers, as to how or when this cruel system will be eradicated.
We have a question about, which I'm welcoming, about Arun's sort of a later phase in his life, where two other places come into strong play in your story. One is a village in the Himalayas where he goes to live with his mother. And then the other is a kind of London world of expats that he enters with Aaliyah after their relationship begins. And it would be great to hear a little bit about those two places and what they mean for Arun, and it just in the context of what you've laid out in your novel.
Well, I have to say, there's a certain bit of autobiography there too, because I retreated very early in my life to a village, which I found very congenial for my writing. And at the same time, at that, while I was there, I met a lot of people who had also retreated. It's a very strong tradition in India in particular of moving away, of renouncing the world and, living a very kind of modest lifestyle. Even if you've been really terribly well educated, or even if you come from a rich family, this sort of whole notion that you should give up things in order to live happily is very strong. That tradition is still very strong. In fact, I just heard that one of my nieces has just done it, extremely well educated. She has an MBA, and also she went to the IIT, and she's just given up everything. She's given up her job and, basically now retreated to a village. And I also spend a lot of time in London, with, not only with the expats, but with the kind of metropolitan left, I think, or liberal left. And I've never ceased to feel the great sort of disjunction between these two very, very different worlds, of an Indian village and a kind of former imperial metropolis where you have a kind of progressive intelligentsia, extremely well educated, extremely smart. So I think, I wanted to sort of bring together these two worlds and to see how they look when someone, say, from a mountain village in India, again, very well educated person, goes to London. How would he see this particular crowd? I mean, I've spent far too long, spent enough time, in that context, so that it's no longer unfamiliar to me. But I had to defamiliarize it in order to write about it in this book, and to try and see it from the eyes of a newcomer, which is what Arun is in London. And he finds that, I mean, I don't want to give away too much, that there is a certain kind of weightlessness to these lives of the rich expats who move from one, major center of financial capitalism to another, who have politics, but the politics is relatively recent. It's not a very clearly thought through politics either.
It seems related to what you were talking about earlier about place and the connection to place being a kind of self-identifier. The people in London feel somewhat placeless. It feels like they could be living those same lives elsewhere. And of course, a lot of that life is happening online. And I wondered if you could speak to that for a second, because you yourself are not a social media force. I think that we share a wariness of all that. And I wonder if you could just speak to that, about how technology figures into these somewhat placeless lives that you describe in London.
Well, I mean, I can't think of any writer who has written more originally and inventively about, social media than, you and I think, I mean, if I had ever imagined joining social media, I think those sort of early desires would have been completely squashed by a reading of Visit from the Goon Squad. I mean, it's something I could really not do. But I think, to answer your question, I mean, I think there's a lot of premium being put on the idea of mobility and visibility in general over the last 2-3 decades. The idea that mobility in itself is a good, and particularly the kind of rapid mobility that success in the globalized world guarantees you. One moment you're in Jakarta, the other moment. I've done quite a bit of that myself to know its attractions, but at the same time, you really do come to live a very disconnected existence. And again, social media aggravates that sense, that sort of disembodied existence that's so many people now have, by multiplying your selves, by projecting a persona out there. So again, the problem that comes from rapid mobility, excessive mobility, is then aggravated by the projection of these different personas, the fact that you're always available publicly to other people, and that you're constantly, in a way, other directed. So again, I mean, I think the things that human beings have lived with for such a long time, some sense of continuity, some sense of stability, those have gone missing. And I feel a lot of the restlessness that comes today, and restlessness is only one of the many symptoms of this. There are far more severe and dangerous symptoms of this excessive mobility and kind of state of disembodiedness. I feel that certainly the characters in my book are suffering from that, of not really having a strong connection to any one place or any one community. And also thinking that they don't need to, because the ideology of the last 3 decades or so has told them that they don't really need to, that their lives are superior to everything that has gone before.
Another question from the chat. This is kind of a hard one, but give it a try. What would you say to the still millions of young people coming of age now who are being unleashed into this difficult world and situation that you describe in India?
Well, I think, their primary experience now is of adversity. I think the idea of hope and aspiring for a better life, those ideas have been checked simply because of the calamity that India has suffered over the last few years. And I feel that younger people living through adversity or accepting adversity as their natural existence are in a much better position to formulate new ideas and new visions of, where to go next. They're not trapped in any illusion about their future or about their country's future. They can see very clearly what has happened and what, the worst things that can happen in the future. And that's what I find in young people in general, that they are free of the illusions that my generation had about our place in the world and about our future, that they have a far more realistic view of what is in store for them and what they can do to change that.
So I think this might end up being the last question. In your recent interview with Penguin, and this is a little shocking to me, you said you aren't planning to write for some time now. Still, can we expect one more travelogue from you? And it's clear that the writer is a fan. So talk about where writing will bring you next, as far as
I have to say, I've enjoyed writing fiction so much that I sometimes wonder whether I can really go back to writing nonfiction, or certainly maybe not nonfiction books. Like, I can write essays or pieces of criticism here and there, but I wonder whether I have the stamina anymore to write a nonfiction book. I haven't told my nonfiction publisher this yet. Maybe I shouldn't.
The cat may be out of the bag, Pankaj.
I'm sure I'll be receiving an email about a proper conversation about this quite soon. But really, I've enjoyed this so much that, I feel like, maybe, there's more to be done here. And again, you've shown this again and again. The form is so capacious. It's you can do so many things with it. And again, you can talk about the present. You don't have to set your books, in the past, in the remote past. You can tackle the present, the things that engage you, the things that interest you, and write about them in a really creative and challenging way. By challenging, I mean that you yourself are challenged and stimulated by the act of writing. Something that I've not felt actually while writing nonfiction.
Well, all I can say is this book is so tremendous that I love the thought of you staying with fiction. I would hate to think of you not writing nonfiction at all, but it just feels like something is so alive here. And it was just a thrill to read it. I'm hoping Greenlight can put the link to the book in the chat again so that everyone can have it. And I want to thank everyone again for being here, especially Pankaj, for sharing your insights and your process. And I cannot recommend this book too highly. It is superb. I feel enriched by it, and I know that it will be with me always. So it's been a joy. Thank you so much, Pankaj.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jenny.
All right, everybody, have a great night getting started on reading this book. And take care. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you both, and thank you, everyone. That was wonderful.